to all and welcome to another of our Nature Talk episode. Here we have got Dillon, and to be honest, I'm a great fan of his work. See his stories every single day. He gives information with fun and with a lot of information about what are the pros and cons of many different things. So Dillon, before we begin, would you please introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, so my name is Dillon on social medias. I'm Dillon the biologist, so I'm a biologist. I really study reptiles and amphibians, and currently my work has focused on the evolutionary biology of Middle American reptiles and amphibians.
So then, with all the work you have done, how long it is that you have been in the field of?
Oh gosh, so I think I've been doing like official university sanctioned research or whatever for 6 years or so now. I think I can't remember what time, but I've been working with animals since I was like 14 or so.
So then, what actually made you interested in enjoying, let's say, the natural world and all these evolution, animals, plants, all these things which makes you interested? How did you got into the field?
Yeah, it was sort of an interesting story because I didn't grow up with this like love for animals and nature. I was actually terrified of everything, like extremely terrified. I wouldn't go gardening because I was scared of worms and whatnot. And then I started working at a pet store, my family's pet store, and then I just got over the fear. It was like a switch flipped, and so ever since then I've just been really, really interested in learning more about them. I don't know. I always emulated like the people I watched growing up. Like I watched Steve Irwin, Zaboomafoo, Mutual, all of that, and it's always that drive to answer a question about an animal or a habitat or a species or anything. That's sort of what's always pushed me forward.
So then, actually, what do you think about, let's say, evolution? Like, I've read the book of Charles Darwin, Origin of Species. And it's amazing, although it's a very bit difficult to understand. So one of the questions which came up recently to the same meeting was that how has evolution began? Like, where was the first seed of evolution, and how did it begin to first place, and all the way, how did it come to let's say mammals that is ourselves?
Right. So that's actually like it gets into like this larger question of what is evolution to begin with, and then also like what is the fundamental unit of evolution? Like we describe everything in terms of units. Speed, it might be, kilometers per hour or something. But in evolution, it's to me, the way I always should it is that it's changed. It is something is changing from one state to another. And it's interesting when you sort of get into like the philosophy of that. It's like, well, then does evolution go beyond life? Do rocks evolve as they change from sedimentary to igneous to metamorphic, et cetera, et cetera? So when it comes to life, though, with evolution, it's always happened with life. Like you can't really have a diversity of life without evolution. It's what's driving things to, well, change. If you have just one difference in a single amino acid going from one state to another, that is evolution. So it's just this fundamental unit of change. But where it first started, I think it just happened when life first started as well. They're not mutual. They're not exclusive realms.
So then, of course, actually, what do you think, when at first did the interrelationship of animals began? And now we know it as today that every animal, every plant is connected with each other in many different ways. Like I'm living in a city currently in Dubai, and I may be dependent on the polar bears living in the Arctic. So from when did this interconnection between the lives on Earth began?
Oh, right. Life on Earth. That has always been one. The number that's coming into my head is 4.6 billion, but I don't think that's right. That might be when Earth first started. So I'm actually forgetting the exact date that we predict life began, because also it's then at what point is life? It's this whole nebulous kind of concept. Is just a collection of proteins life, or it doesn't need the ability to reproduce? Is it just what is life? Like that's the best question. So honestly, I don't know the exact time when life began, but yeah, a long time ago for sure.
Yes, of course. And then what do you think? What is the difference between, let's say, the climate change that happened during the dinosaurs age or the climate change that is happening right now? Which one is more dangerous and which one is happening at a faster rate?
Yeah, so there is this there is historical climate change. That is like an undisputed fact, right? But the difference is the frequency of that change, how quickly that change is accelerated. So it used to be, I mean, the stuff that I usually read about is glaciation events, because that just affects species distributions and also species themselves. So glaciers recede, they also go down, basically it's this ebb and flow, but that ebb and flow happens over tens of thousands of years. It's extraordinarily long, whereas the climate change that we're seeing today is happening within decades. It is extraordinarily fast. That's why we talk about the hockey stick curve. If you look at how temperature is changing or carbon dioxide emissions, it follows this like slightly cyclic pattern, up and down, and then it just shoots straight up with directly with humans. So it's the modern climate change is very, very, very different than historical climate change, and I think that gets lost in some of the arguments. But the stuff that we're going on today is very dangerous. It is slightly terrifying how quickly things are changing.
Now then, if you have seen some of my work, it's always talking about climate change, sustainability. So what do you think? Like, how dangerous is climate change? What do you think by let's say the adoption of different animals, by the evolution that you're looking at? How dangerous? At what point of danger are we? Can we get back to the normal level soon, or it's going to be too late in, let's say, 10 years or so?
Right. So this is something that always comes up because we've reached that I'm forgetting the exact term, but there's a threshold where we can't go back to a normal state. And if I'm remembering all of my stories right, we already passed it, but I think that there's a bit of a doomsday sort of idea with that, where it's like, yes, we've passed a point where we can't get right back to normal, but it doesn't mean that's the end of the world. So it's wrapped up in that whole idea of like climate optimism. Things are, just as climate change is progressing rapidly, our technology is progressing, our understanding of it is progressing just as rapidly, and there are these new solutions that I'm really trying to learn more about, because it's a completely different field than what I really am familiar with. But it is very hopeful, but that doesn't mean that we're anywhere out of the woods by any means. Just in terms of species, so there's a background extinction rate, where just species go extinct at some rate, like 2 species every year or something along those lines. The current background extinction rate it's not even comparable to today's extinction rate. It is so much lower. Species are going extinct at a much, much, much faster rate than the background extinction, which is saying that something is going on. It is deviating from what is normal. And climate change is climate change, as well as like just humans and land use and habitat degradation, is a very large component of why that extinction rate is so much higher today.
Now, Dillon, this is the very question which I find difficult when people ask me, because for people who love animals and all these things, when you ask them what's your favorite animal, they will always say, all of them. So what would you say? What is your favorite animal?
Yeah, so I always go to the group. It's salamanders. I love them. They're just super, super fascinating from a science perspective. They just do things in incredible ways. And then if I want to even get lower, I can get it down to a genus, and that's Bolitoglossa. They are these like Central and South American salamanders that are just super, 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 super cool. I mean, they breathe through their skin. They don't have lungs. They have these like projectile tongues. They have these like suction cup feet, like Mission Impossible almost, walking up trees. They're just super, super, super cool. But beyond that, I cannot get down to like a single species. So it's just the Bolitoglossa salamanders.
So then, like, do you have got any pets, or do you keep, let's say, an animal for let's test experiments in your house for testing on it?
No. I used to have a ton of pets. I used to have, I think at my peak it was about 40 or 50. But then I got rid of them because I went to college, and then I kind of liked not having pets to take care of because I could just leave for a week if I wanted to. So I just don't keep anything anymore. Although every now and then I'm like, I should set up an aquarium or something, and it's the dangerous game because I know if I set up one, I'll set up 7.
So then you spoke about salamanders. They are extraordinary creatures. The way they breathe from their skin and they move like Mission Impossible, as you said. So what do you think? Like, how has, let's say, climate change or plastic pollution or all these chemicals we are putting in agricultural fields and such, how are they having an effect on these salamanders? I've heard of a fungus, I forgot its name, which affects frogs, right?
Yep.
The fungus which destroys the skin in order to absorb all the nutrients. And so does that the same fungi affect the salamanders as well?
Not the same fungi, but a very closely related species. So it's chytrid fungus that really affects the frogs, and there's a variation of it that is purely for salamanders. But it more or less does the same thing. It gets on their skin and it really affects their ability to breathe and basically exchange water easily. And then that's always been a very interesting. It's a very interesting fungus to study. Very, very interesting disease dynamic because it's basically spread worldwide. There's not many great solutions on it, but it does seem that some species are getting some background resistance to it. So we're hoping, but it is extremely deadly if it does get into a population that has no resistance. But with salamanders and amphibians in general, they're really good bioindicators because their skin is permeable. Ours isn't really that permeable. It's water gets on it, kind of stays on it. With them, they just absorb it. So if there's pesticides in the water, if there's any type of real pollutant, it can drastically affect them. So, and then also, climate change really affects them too because they're a little bit they're just sensitive species. That's in general they're sensitive. There's a few exceptions like bullfrogs that don't seem to care as much. But they are very highly affected by things like pollution, by changes in temperature, by land use development. So it's really important to keep them in mind. I love seeing them when I find them at local parks, but it's always like, oh, how much longer are you going to be here?
So then what do you think? Of course, many people who have my account and all these things, they're mostly children and those people who are interested in wildlife. So what sort of message you have for them? Like, what can they do in their lives to save animals from, let's say, climate change or pollution, or indeed save the salamanders itself? Like, of course, I've seen people when they go to the beach or all these different places, they always go and they touch the wild animals, and that's going to harm them, let's say jellyfishes and such. So what do you think? What can I do as an individual to save the natural world, let's say, from climate change and such problems?
Yeah, the absolute best thing you can do is get involved in some way. I'm a big believer in that, like, small steps equate to big change, and it's this. I don't like the save the world mentality because I don't think one person can ever really save the world, but I think it's always work on saving just something close to you. There are so many local parks that have a friends of this park, and they just go out there and pick up litter, do revegetation projects. There are so many great ways to get involved at a local level, and then once you get involved at that local level, you start to see things a little bit differently. You can actually see how the world is this interconnected thing. You see how little species require plants and all these other interconnected forces to really survive properly. So I always recommend just getting involved in some way. If it's doing trail cleanups, if it's doing outreach and education, if it's just going to schools and setting up a booth, just get involved in some way, and don't get caught up in trying to do the best thing or the biggest thing. Just do something. That's what matters at the end of the day, and it's fun. It's always fun to do it, so why not? So then,
I think this will be a very difficult question, but what was your most fun moment in nature? What was the moment that you say, oh my god, this was something that I could have never seen but finally got to see? What was that moment of awe-inspiring or breathtaking moment that you had?
Yeah, so it's immediately it comes to mind. So I was living in Belize for about 6 months. It's this Central American country on the Yucatan Peninsula, really close to Mexico. And I was living in the Mayan Mountains and doing there a bunch of different research projects. I was leading a few interns and just kind of had a free rein almost to do whatever project. And I was really interested in these two species of frogs, Rena juliani and Rena violante. They were they were very interesting to me because one of them, we found both of them at low elevations, but only one of them was supposed to be there. So only Violanti was supposed to be at this lower elevation, with Giuliani being only at higher elevations, but we had both. And then we also knew they were hybridizing. But we didn't really know how. But I was doing a bunch of surveys. I was basically going out there looking for frogs, looking for anything, but also scooping up tadpoles and identifying them. And I had this really weird observation of I could only find the tadpoles of Violanti. I couldn't find Giuliani tadpoles, the ones that were supposed to be super high elevation. So we eventually decided to make a little project around this, and I would just go out and scoop up tadpoles. So one, that was just fun, like going into the river with a net and just scooping up 50 of them at a time and IDing them all. But then we decided, okay, well, we need to go up into higher elevations. So we did this like 8-hour hike up into high elevations. It was just up this river. It was very brutal. We did it most of the night, and it just got kind of nuts. But it was then the other problem of we only found the other species of tadpole when we got to high elevations. So I'm like, what? Like, I cannot find hybrid tadpoles by any means unless there's something I can't figure out. I can't find an area where they actually are like overlapping. Like, I can't find an area where both tadpoles are in the same spot, so I couldn't find it. And it's like, what is going on here? Then the next day we had this massive flooding event. And we would get them often, and it's just really destructive when they happen. It knocks over all of our bridges and gets gets gnarly. And I decided to sample after that. So I went to like my usual spot and started scooping, and I found 0 tadpoles. I'm like, this is weird. Usually I find 50 within 10 minutes. Went to my next spot, didn't find any. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So I went down to my final spot, and there was this little pool of water that was off to the side. It wasn't connected to the main body. And inside of there, I found the high elevation tadpole at the lowest elevation spot on our property. And I just got so excited because I'd spent like months just sampling tadpoles trying to find this exact tadpole at it. And so we think it's because of flooding events, and that's why we're having these high elevation species at low elevations, but not the other way around. And it's this like, it's a system that I'm always thinking about because it's just so dynamic and interesting to me. But yeah, it was the pure joy of finding that one tadpole at the low elevation spot. Some reason that has always stuck with me.
So Dillon, of course, I think, yeah, I follow your account on Instagram, and I truly love the way that you're sharing your information. You're giving us the facts, the extraordinary facts about all these animals and evolution. And at the same time, you're being very, you're being fun when you're explaining. You're all these, like, I also follow Adam Talks Wild, and he also posts some of your videos and all these things. Where you take the Halloween of the frog costume you had. So what is the main message behind this? Like, of course, I've seen most biologists and scientists, they're very solid and serious, when you're explaining something. That's it enough. So what is the main message behind this? Like,
yeah, so so something that has always sort of bothered me with like science communication and just science communication in general is that a lot of people feel like they have to be very, very serious. They have to communicate seriously, and the problem is that it's boring. It's like I don't want to read an encyclopedia every time. I mean, that might be because I'm already having to read so much scientific literature that when I go to social media, I want a break. But I think the problem with that is that, and this is true of so many biologists, is that people don't see the biologists as people. They see them as workers. They see them as just someone doing a project. And that's something I've always tried to break down a little bit, is that scientists are people too, and they're doing people things. Every time I've helped someone out in the field, it's been so much fun. It's way goofier and, I mean, just fun. But that's never shown, really. So whenever I'm trying to communicate, I'm really big on telling stories, because I think that's how we connect as humans, is through storytelling. And I'm big on portraying the facts as a story, because that's what it is. And I think evolution owes itself to that really nicely, because evolution is the story of ecology. So yeah, I try to have fun with it, and I try to show that, like, I'm a person, and I'm gonna be a person on social media, but I'm a person who knows evolutionary biology. So that's really all I push for on my account. Just be fun and be a person.
So then, what can you say about the evolutionary biology as you spoke about it? Like, what actually you work on the main in the field, let's say?
Oh, I think I cut out for a second. What was the question?
I was asking that you spoke about evolutionary biology, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what is the main thing? What do you actually work on, and what's the fun thing about evolutionary biology? Because most people think about evolutionary biology. I myself think of dinosaurs and old age isopods and all these things. So what do you actually work on?
Yeah, so my study right now is this large, big data biogeography study. Words got all mixed up. It's where basically I'm trying to uncover areas of shared evolutionary history for all of Middle Americans' herpetofauna. So this is like Mexico and Central America, all of their reptiles and amphibians. I want to find areas that have these very similar patterns of evolutionary history, and I can go into so many different rabbit holes from there. But the thing with evolutionary biology that is so fascinating to me is I come from an ecology background where I'm just learning what species are here and what are they doing, how many are here, what species are there. But evolution is the underlying principle that actually informs ecology. It's the reason ecology looks the way it does is because of evolution. So that's what's always fascinated me. And with evolution is that it's always happening and at so many different scales. So yes, we can absolutely talk about evolution in terms of 65 million years or XYZ, but it can also happen within 1,000 years. It can happen within a couple generations. There are so many laboratory studies that happen within just a couple of years where you're just manipulating bacteria, for example, or insects. So evolution operates at so many different scales, and that's what makes it so interesting to study, because there are so many different things you can study. If it's biogeography, for example, which is what I'm really into, or it might be something like population genetics, where we're just discussing how species move, like how species genetics flow between different populations and change over time. There's just so many different ways to actually tackle it, and that's what I think is so fascinating. So I'm always being pulled from many different areas of like, where do I want my project to go next? And there's always something else I want to study.
Yes, so that's indeed great. Yeah. So Dillon, like you have been doing this, as you said, from the age of 14. That I guess a very long time. So I myself can tell that in the past 6 years of all these research and all these preserving, I've seen a decrease in the populations of animals. Let's say the population size or the population we have reduced in great numbers. So have you witnessed yourself that human activities, what are the effects on, let's say, the wildlife in the past years that you have been working on the field?
Yeah, so it's the one thing that I know the US has been focusing on a little bit more, has been the fact that like we just don't really have as many bugs as we used to. Where it used to be if you were driving at night, your windshield would just be splattered with them, and now you just don't see them at all. Some people say that's a pro, but it's really a con because they form a core unit of the ecosystem. And it's been interesting because I've now finally lived long enough to actually see changes where there were places that I remember when I was 15 or 16 that I would go hiking at that are now more surrounded by development. There was this local park that I absolutely loved at my undergrad university, Lick Creek Park. It was an all-natural park. It was really the only one we had. And I remember hiking through there one day, and there was a clear cut through literally the middle of the park, about 150 feet wide, just so they could put a pipe in there that was this big. And so it sucks that I've seen the forces, but it's also made me really aware about how human activities do disrupt wildlife in really like broad and large scale ways. So it does in many ways, but there's also a lot of good positivity. There's more awareness of it. There's more focus on trying to do things sustainably. So it's still not the best, but I do think things are getting better overall. It just needs to get better a little bit quicker, in my opinion.
So then, what do you think of, let's say, all the inhabitants on Earth? Let's say, what do you think? Like, how can we all connect to the natural world? Like, let's say, I'm not a person who are into insects, and I want to connect to the natural world. So, what do you think? Like, of course, I think that first comes understanding, and then comes the saving of the natural world. Because if you don't understand, you don't know what to save. And all these things. So what do you think if I'm a person who's not interested in the natural world? How can I, if I'm going to make an awareness campaign or something, how can I make that person, interested in, let's say, going and exploring the natural world, going and saving it?
Yeah, this is something I've always been trying to figure out how to do properly, and I think there's a lot of reasons why we have that disconnect. More and more people live in cities and suburban areas that are not really nature accessible, and we've kind of destroyed it. I mean, one of my earliest projects was an urban park, and it was incredible. It was 17 acres. It was barely a blip on a map, but it had almost 30 species of reptiles and amphibians in just one little park. And I think that is honestly the best thing to get people into nature and understand it, is to have these like areas that they can easily access, because it's so easy to be like, well, I want to get into nature, but it's an hour away, so that it feels like nature is this other place. It's this outside realm that isn't really part of your daily life. And now I live in a city where there's, stupid amount of nature around me, so I can walk, and I'm in a beautiful canyon in 10 minutes. But in terms of like making it understandable to people, you always got to make it personal to them, and that's the important thing. Like, yes, we, like, a lot of people who are into nature want to save it because it's nature, because of its just intrinsic value, but to for lack of a better term, the average person, they may not understand that connection, or they don't have a positive connection with nature. So it's trying to make it better for them. Like, you could talk about it from a financial point of view, that it's actually, you'll save money if you have nature, and nature is a really awesome free activity to go out and explore and have fun with it. It's good for your health, mental and physical, to be out in nature. But it is tricky. I think it's just, instead of like really pushing people to love nature and like saying like, you need to love nature or else you're not a good person, it's really just showing that, hey, why don't we just go on a hike and take them along with you and say, oh, there's this really cool thing, and showing people that nature is more than like big mountaintop views with these beautiful sunsets. It's like there's beauty in every little thing. Like, I love flipping logs and seeing all these microorganisms, these like are tiny little insects, and like everything that you could find underneath a log is fascinating to me. So it's showing that there are these beautiful values to nature that are small as well as large, and I think that goes a long way for people to be more sympathetic to nature.
So then, always when we think of sustainability, we think of, okay, we have to like reduce the amount of plastic we use. Oh God, we have to have many losses. We have to walk more and drive less and all these things. But sustainability it's having a lot of gains. It has got, there'll be less poverty on our planet. Eating more plants will have a healthier diet for all of us, and of course much more. And we'll of course get closer to the natural world as it is. But then what do you think? How long have we got until we truly face the consequences of what we are doing today? Okay, let's say 10 years old. How long do you think, according to your evolutionary, studies and all these things, how long have we got until we reach the tipping point?
Oof. So it's, I feel like we're already there, and that's the thing. It's like we have a global pandemic going on right now, which is largely aided because of wet markets and exploiting wildlife. So we're already there to an extent. I mean, like, I'm looking at, so I'm from Texas originally, and right now Texas is having massive power outages because of a random freak snowstorm. It has never in the history of Texas had the entire state under a winter advisory with many inches of snow. And that's a very obvious effect of climate change, which is the big reason we as a society switched from the term global warming to climate change is because of misunderstandings. Like, it's snowing, so where's global warming? But no, you're going to have extremes in either way. So we're already there. We're already seeing the effects. We're already seeing mass ocean acidification. We're seeing coral die-offs. We're seeing mass pollution. We're already past whatever tipping point we're at, but that doesn't mean we can't go back. That's what I think is like really important to focus on, because I'm so worried about this. The world is already past a tipping point. It's already past what we can really do. So there's no point in saving it anymore. And it's such a tricky thing. I don't know if I don't think we're actually past the point of no return yet, in terms of the world is screwed, there's nothing we can do. We still have time to fix it, but I don't know how much time we have left. That's just outside of my realm of expertise.
So then, of course, let's say, what was the saddest thing you have seen happening to nature? I've seen, people coming and hunting all these, let's say, crabs or, oysters in the ocean when there is the fish market around, or putting out jellyfishes off the oceans, or the coral bleaching. What was the saddest thing you saw in your career that was truly, oh God, I cannot see this? It's.
Yeah, I was on vacation actually. I went to this. There's this beach in Alabama that is gorgeous, Dolphin Island, and while we were there, there was an algal bloom. So red algae. It's pretty nasty. It's usually caused by humans in a lot of ways, but it usually just kills a bunch of fish. It's not too great. You're not supposed to fish while it's going on, or else it's bad for you. And I went on this hike going down far on the beach, and I was pretty far away from everyone, and then a few hundred yards ahead of me, I see this washed up dolphin, and it's like, oh gosh. So I ran over because I saw the waves hitting it, and I thought it was still alive because it looked like it, but when I got to it, it was already way gone. Its eyes were starting to bulge, and it was like this really awful. At first it was like, oh God, what happened? And then it was like, oh, this was very likely caused by that algae bloom. So it was super sad to see this. I mean, yeah, it was really tough to see that. And just knowing that I was alone and there was no one else there, it was just, it was this weird, ephemeral experience. But yeah, it always stuck with me, always did.
Now, Dillon, before we conclude, what do you think of the work that I do? I think I've seen some of my work, maybe, let's say, videos and such. So what do you think? Are my work having an impact? What do you think of the work I do, let's say?
Yeah, you're 100% making an impact. That's the thing. Just doing podcasts, interviews like this makes an impact. It elevates voices, and it gets people to hopefully see a viewpoint that they may not have thought about before. And that's the thing. I think every single person should be doing some type of outreach or some type of communication just like this, because it's fun. It's just fun to do it, but also it makes an impact because people really latch onto it and really get to see incredible things. Like I know I saw your post shared a couple times through like various channels and whatnot. It's so hard to keep track of it on Instagram, but it's 100% making an impact, right? Like I'm loving the work that you're doing. It's making an impact, and that's what's really important. And hopefully it inspires others to make an impact. Like that's what I'm more concerned about. I'm more focused on, or I'm less focused on myself making an impact and more focused on inspiring others to make an impact. So
thank you very much. It was great talking to you. Thank you for your time, and have a good morning from your side, and have a great night from our side, I think so.
Yeah.